Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. This is a new presentation from www.central-mosque.com and from the Humble Heart YouTube channel. The topic today is BBC bias and hypocrisy. Emma Barnett, Jewish versus Zara Muhammad, Muslim. The reason I've placed this word Jewish is not to indicate her religion, because obviously she has the right to follow whichever religion she chooses to. But the part of this presentation is how she treats her own religion compared to how she treated a Muslim, Zara Muhammad, on the same issue, which is the role of Muslims, which will become clear as we go through this presentation. When it comes to BBC, one of their flagship programs is the Newsnight. They started that on the 28th of January 1990, and BBC advertises this as in-depth investigation and analysis. However, when you peel the layers and look at it over the years, it's anything but. A lot of times the journalists are allowed to inject their subjective bias, their feelings, their opinions, and it's not fully based on hard facts. The problem is that only those with deep pockets, great political outreach, and good legal departments can challenge BBC, take BBC on, make them admit to bias, make them apologize, or take any sort of restorative action. When it comes to Muslims or pro-Palestinian groups or Black Lives Matter, then when it comes to BBC in general and Newsnight in particular, it's open day. It's interrogation, inquisition, incessant bullying with no repercussions whatsoever. There have been occasions where BBC has admitted to bias, and I'm going to just talk about a few cases to make that point. So we know in the late 1990s there was the Hinduja affair, over which Peter Mandelson resigned. So it took a lot of effort for BBC Board of Governors to admit bias on Newsnight. This was done on 25th of April 2001. In 2012, in the Jimmy Savile sex abuse case, Newsnight was going to do an investigation, and they dropped it. It was so embarrassing for the BBC. A lot of pressure was put upon the BBC, to the point where George Entwistle, the Director General of BBC at the time, appeared before the British Parliament and apologized for the catastrophic mistake. The third time, this is Emily Maitlis. This is recent in 2020, last year, in May, when she invited Dominic Cummings to talk about his traveling from London to Durham during coronavirus lockdown, and she made some comments which are outside the purview of investigative journalism. Once again, conservatives are in power. A minister from conservative government hounded, and BBC Newsnight admitted to breaching BBC impartiality guidelines. What I'm trying to say here is every single one of this example, there are some very powerful forces that are taking BBC on. If you're not powerful enough, you do not have deep pockets, or you don't have a good legal department, you got no chance. You're going to be hounded by people like Emily Maitlis or Emma Barnett, who joined Newsnight in 2019. She talks about her Orthodox Jewish upbringing, her family, her husband, and so on. Once again, that's of no consequence to me what someone chooses to follow as a religion. The problem is her treatment of the same issue within her religion of Orthodox Judaism, which she explains away, as it will become clear very soon, compared to what she did with a Muslim, Zara Muhammad. Before we talked about her bias when it comes to Islam, let's talk about her credentials as an investigative journalism. So she did a program on the 3rd of August 2020, and she interviewed Roberto Sandoya Escobar. This guy authored a book, and he claimed to be the son of the famous cocaine smuggler Pablo Escobar from Colombia. So she gave him a lot of fame because, he appeared on BBC, he talked about his story, talked about his book, and telling people to go buy his book if you watch the entire interview in full. So this kind of, for me, establishes her credibility as a journalist. Let's watch this clip and then we'll talk about it.
Yes, it's quite an extraordinary moment, but interestingly enough, of course, we didn't have the internet in 1989, and my adopted father was working in Madrid, and he called me up from Madrid, and I was working in Sotogrande on the southern coast of Spain, and he said I needed to come up and do some Christmas shopping, and we need to have a chat. And basically it all culminated in this story coming out about who my real father was and so on and so forth. And frankly, I didn't really know who he was anyway. At that moment in time, it wasn't the massive impact that people think it might have been, but it wasn't really, because I didn't really know who he was. It took quite a while for me to work out who this guy was, and of course, he reminded me that this was the man that we went to visit in Medellin on a regular basis. So I had a picture of him in my mind.
And we'll come to that in just a moment, because you had met him several times throughout your life. Yes. But what was remarkable was the circumstances of how your adoptive father, the man who raised you, came to have you in the first place, working undercover for MI6. He rescued you and adopted you from having got you out of a shootout as your birth mother died from wounds next to you.
Yeah. I mean, I said to Dad quite a few times, what were the images that I had in my head about a woman in a red dress and all these noises? You know, they were just flash images that I had from my early childhood. I didn't really know what they were. They were nightmares. And he filled in the gaps reluctantly, of course, and it took a long time. It wasn't a moment. It was, over 2 or 3 years that I got information out of him, because he was obviously totally gutted about what happened.
I played you a clip from this utterly preposterous interview by Emma Barnett. The problem with this interview is that this person is fake. There are dozens of witnesses from his school who have testified about his age. His pictures from his school days are on the internet. He claims that his adopted British father was assigned to Colombia by MI6 in 1970s, which is impossible because Pablo Escobar was a nobody in 1970s, and there was no reason for MI6 or the CIA or anyone else to assign resources and investigate a petty criminal back then. He claims that he is 3 years younger than his birth certificate date of birth. If we accept this claim, it would mean that Pablo Escobar, his alleged father, was 12 years old when he was born, and he was 2 years old when he started attending primary school. Emma Barnett sensationalized this fake story without any in-depth analysis and investigation, as BBC claims. BBC are still sticking to the story, and there's been no rebuttal, no apology, no retraction of any kind whatsoever. Joshua Verasamy, right here, is an artist, a Black Lives Matter activist, and pro-Palestine. He expressed views that atrocities committed to Palestinians are gagged in the British media and not fully covered. Emma Barnett twisted his views about Palestine to be anti-Semitic and regularly cut him off in the middle of the interview. Here's a clip from the 15th of October 2020 interview.
Journey, and I ask this because in June, the official Black Lives Matter UK Twitter account tweeted, as Israel moves forward with the annexation of the West Bank and mainstream British politics is, quote, gagged of the right to critique Zionism, we loudly and clearly stand beside our Palestinian comrades. Free Palestine. Gagged. Who's gagging who?
That's a good question. The tweet was mainly talking about the fact that during the annexation of the West Bank and during a situation where Palestine is being, colonized, a conversation is not happening. And that conversation is not happening for many reasons. One of the reasons, for example, is the IHRA definition, which in many ways does disallow conversations to happen about the true nature of what's happening in Palestine. I think what you're getting at is that many people saw that as an anti-Semitic tweet, and it would be anti-Semitic to pretend that there's a homogenous belief around what's happening in Israel and Palestine. A lot of radical Jewish groups.
Those two things are entirely separate. Do you think it's anti-Semitic to infer that politicians are being gagged by some Jewish force to stop criticism of Israel?
I think there's two things here. I think one, the tweet didn't say they're being gagged by some kind of Jewish force. That's actually to put words that don't exist into the tweet.
It's inferred.
It's not inferred.
It is.
The word is gagged. Gagged is a literal English word. It means that there's a conversation is not being allowed to happen. It's not allowed to happen.
By whom?
Well, as I said, it's like things like the IHRA definition.
Sorry, that's a definition. By whom? Who is doing the gagging? The people who wrote that definition of what anti-Semitism is?
Well, yeah, that's a piece. That's a definition that, when implemented, disallows a genuine conversation around what's happening in Israel to happen, because a lot of people, whether that's business people or and they don't need to be Jewish, just anybody who has stakes in the conversation on Israel going a certain way, might proclaim that any conversation around Israel.
Did you just say a lot of business people in response to who may have written a definition of anti-Semitism?
No, I'm making a separate point. I'm saying a lot of people have a stake in the fact that would like to see that any conversation around Israel is spoken about as anti-Semitic, or any conversation around Zionism is seen as anti-Semitic. And part of what happens with the use of the IHRA definition is that we can't have an honest conversation about what's happening in Israel and Palestine.
So you can hear in the clip that Joshua is clearly talking about suppressing conversation about Israeli atrocities towards Palestinians, and she keeps interrupting and inferring when he's clearly refuting her claims. Once again, no apologies, no rebuttal, nothing from BBC. Next, Kelechi Okafor is an actress and a Me Too activist. The self-proclaimed feminist Emma Barnett set up an interview and then accidentally said on an open mic that, "Have we booked an anti-Semite?" Kelechi walked out and did not give the interview. Emma Barnett did not apologize but explained the issue away. By the way, Kelechi is also an anti-racist campaigner and pro-Palestine. I'm not including her comments due to strong language. Now let's turn to Emma Barnett's interview with Rabbi Sylvia Rothschild on the 11th of March 2014. In Orthodox Judaism, there are no female rabbis here. Emma Barnett explains away the position of Judaism despite admitting being a feminist. She has no problems and even attempts to justify it by saying women aren't treated unequally in Judaism, they just have different roles. Here's a clip.
I remember being very shocked when I learned that my Jewish husband grew up with a female rabbi. I was shocked because the rabbi was a woman, and as a feminist, I was also shocked at my own reaction. But there it was, the direct result of being a feminist and an Orthodox Jew. It's an uncomfortable place to be. How can I be a feminist and expect totally equal treatment as a woman in my secular life, but struggle seeing women as rabbis in my Jewish life? Women aren't treated unequally in Judaism, they just have different roles to men. I was brought up in the Orthodox tradition, so I'm totally unfamiliar with the idea of a female rabbi. To me, it's just not traditional. I know this is hypocritical, but I am not alone in these views amongst my secular, politically liberal Jewish female friends. It's just most of them would never admit this prejudice publicly, nor can they really explain why they hold it. Last week, I spoke to a high-flying Jewish woman at the top of her professional field about how she reconciles the two sides of her life. And now I want to discover why I feel like this and if I could ever see a female rabbi and not think it unusual.
So you just heard her explain away how women have different roles in Judaism. Then here's a clip of Emma Barnett bullying Sister Zara Mohammed from the 4th of February 2021. By the way, in my opinion, Sister Zara Mohammed should have categorically stated that there's no such thing as female imams, but I want you to pay attention to the relentless bullying of a Muslim at the hands of an obvious pro-Zionist journalist. There are many Muslims who are bashing Sister Zara Mohammed, but in my opinion, in the face of relentless bullying, she kept her cool, which is commendable. Over time, she will learn and get better, so there's not much point in bashing her about not directly answering the question. Before I play the relentless bullying of a Muslim woman by a practicing Jewish journalist who has no problems with Judaism having a similar position, I just want to point out that she probably got her line of questioning from supposedly moderate Muslims like Kanta Ahmed, who published her opinion in the famous pro-Zionist and pro-Israel Spectator magazine. I hope that this entire presentation puts the policy of BBC and its bias out in the open. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Here's the clip of bullying of Zara Mohammed.
How many female imams are there in the UK at the moment? Just because I presume we'll get to this more, but representing, of course, women, which you will do as part of this, how many do we have in Britain?
I mean, I think, again, I wouldn't have a clue on these numbers because my role is making sure that we include our affiliates, particularly women, in the work that we are doing and making sure that our structures, as well as the work we do, are truly representative. So I think that,
Do we, sorry, you don't know, that's fine if you don't know, but do we have female imams in this country?
I mean, again, it's not. What are you referring to? Chaplains? Or are you referring to women that lead the prayer? What are you referring to? And I think,
well, you tell me. I'm genuinely intrigued to know. Of course, female priests have been around for some time. We've also seen the advent of female rabbis in this country. What is the picture for women leading prayer in Britain in Muslim communities?
well, I think my role isn't really to adjudicate or to examine that part of spirituality. I think where women want to make those choices and where, that these are all religious discussions
Oh,
as
no,
the
no, of
Muslim
course.
Council of Britain.
It was just, I thought, because the Muslim Council of Britain's played such an important role in getting the number of Muslims, for instance, added to the census. I mean, that was done at the turn of the century, so we actually knew how many Muslims there were. Do we have female imams?
I think what's really important for the Muslim Council of Britain and the work that we do is actually that it's not about defining, or going into these types of questions regarding spirituality, but actually looking at how we can benefit our communities, especially given the pandemic and given,
of course,
the role that everybody needs to be playing.
And we will get to the pandemic. It's just quite striking that you can't sort of answer that question. I recognise it's not a religious or spiritual role.
Exactly. I don't feel like that's within the parameters of my roles and responsibilities, especially as, the first elected female representative.
I would have asked a man, but I'm asking you because
just...
you're here.
Since my recording, I want to add one more thing. BBC decided to tweet about this particular clip from this entire program to try to humiliate British Muslims and highlight the incessant interrogation by Emma Barnett. It backfired spectacularly. There was such a backlash by not only Muslims but non-Muslims and particularly women. The BBC have quietly gone behind the scenes and deleted the tweet where they advertised this program. That's all. That's all the action they took on this issue. Nothing else about this open bias and incessant bullying of a Muslim woman on a platform like the BBC.